My grandson was about to inherit $50 million. The woman he loved was planning to take half and leave him with nothing. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn him. I made one quiet decision that saved his future. My name is Francine. I am 75 years old, and this is my story. They say ignorance is bliss. But sometimes hearing the truth is the only thing that can save your family. And 3 months ago, I overheard something that froze the blood in my veins. What I did next, without raising my voice, without confronting a single soul, is the reason my grandson still has his future. When Andrew's parents passed, he was 10 years old. I was 60. Most women my age were thinking about slowing down. I was packing up my quiet life and becoming a mother all over again, because that boy was my blood, and blood does not get left behind. I raised him. I went to his school plays and his graduation. I sat with him through grief that no child should have to carry. I watched him become a kind, gentle, trusting young man, and I thanked God for him every single day. His parents had left him well provided for. $50 million held in trust until his 25th birthday. I had guarded that inheritance for 15 years. I took that responsibility as seriously as any I had ever carried. Andrew knew the money was coming. He didn't obsess over it. That was never his nature. He was focused on his future, on building something real. And then he met Michelle. She was 24, beautiful, charming. She had a way of making everyone in the room feel like the most important person there. And Andrew, sweet Andrew, had never been loved like that before. I tried to be open-minded. I tried to see what he saw, but something sat uneasy with me. A grandmother's instinct is not nothing. 50 years of reading people tells you things your eyes alone cannot. Still, I said nothing. It was not my place. He was a grown man and she made him happy. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I was visiting Andrew's home on a Tuesday. He was in the shower. I was settled in the sitting room with my knitting, comfortable, quiet, half dozing in the afternoon light. Michelle stepped out onto the back porch to take a phone call. She thought I was asleep. She wasn't whispering. "I told you, Brenda," she said, and her voice was nothing like the voice she used with Andrew. It was cold, flat, the voice of someone doing arithmetic. "We get married before he turns 25. Once that clock strikes midnight on his birthday, the 50 million unlocks. Then 6 months later, divorce. I take half. He gets nothing but a broken heart and an empty bank account. It's the perfect plan." I sat very still. My knitting needles did not move. $50 million. The inheritance his parents had worked and sacrificed to leave him. The money I had guarded for 15 years, and she was not marrying him for love. She was marrying him for a payout. I did not walk onto that porch. I did not raise my voice. I waited until she came back inside, smiling that warm practice smile, and I said nothing. But I had made a decision. I could not simply tell Andrew what I had heard. I knew my grandson. He was deeply in love. He would look at me with those kind eyes and tell me I had misunderstood, that I was overprotective, that I had never fully trusted Michelle, and this was proof of nothing except my own fears. And if I pushed too hard, if he felt cornered, he was capable of marrying her immediately just to prove his independence. Young love does not respond well to ultimatums. It digs in. No, I needed a plan, a quiet plan. A plan that would protect his inheritance and his heart without ever telling him how close he had come to losing both. The next morning, I went to see Mr. Morgan. Mr. Morgan had handled Andrew's parents' estate for over 20 years. He was the kind of lawyer who understood that the law exists to protect people, not just to process paperwork. I sat across from him and I told him everything, every word I had heard on that porch. I did not exaggerate. I did not editorialize. I simply told him what was said. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and was quiet for a long moment. "Francine," he said carefully, "if we confront Andrew with this directly, we risk driving him straight toward her. Young men in love do not respond to warnings. They respond to evidence. And what you overheard while damning is not the kind of evidence a court or a 24-year-old in love will act on." "So what do we do?" I asked. "His birthday is in 3 months. Once the money transfers, it's his outright. She'll have him convinced to skip the prenup before the ink is dry." Mr. Morgan leaned forward. "There is a provision in the original will," he said. "It allows for an irrevocable protective trust to be established if the beneficiary is deemed vulnerable to undue influence. We don't need to prove she's a criminal, Francine. We just need to restructure the assets before the birthday." He explained it carefully. The $50 million would move into an irrevocable trust. Andrew would still benefit, monthly income, dividends, a generous stipend. But the principal would be untouchable. In the event of a divorce, the trust would remain entirely intact. She would walk away with nothing but her share of whatever the two of them had acquired together in the marriage, which, if things moved as quickly as she planned, would be almost nothing at all. On his birthday, Andrew would receive $10,000 as a visible, accessible gift, proof that he had come into his inheritance. "And how do we convince him to agree to this?" I asked. "He'll think we're trying to control his money." Mr. Morgan smiled. "We don't mention Michelle at all. We tell him it's about taxes. Everyone fears the IRS, Francine, even young men in love." That weekend, I invited Andrew and Michelle to dinner. Michelle arrived in good spirits, full of chatter about wedding venues and honeymoon destinations. I watched her across the table and kept my face warm and pleasant. I waited until dessert. "Andrew," I said, setting down my fork, "Mr. Morgan called this week. With your birthday approaching, we need to talk about the inheritance." Andrew straightened. "Of course, Grandma. What's the situation?" "The tax laws have changed," I said. "I asked the Lord to forgive me for the deception, but I believe he understood my reasoning. If you receive the full $50 million as a lump sum, you'll lose nearly 40% taxes immediately. However, if we place it in a protective family trust, the tax burden drops to almost nothing. You still receive the income, you live comfortably, the principal stays protected from the taxman and grows over time." I watched Michelle's eyes. I saw the calculation happening behind them. She had been planning on half of $50 million. Half of a taxed lump sum was still significant, but half of an irrevocable trust she couldn't touch. She said nothing. She was waiting to see how Andrew responded. "But I wanted access to the money," Andrew said, glancing at her. "For the house, for the wedding." "You'll receive $10,000 on your birthday," I said, "and a monthly stipend of $15,000. That's $180,000 a year, Andrew, tax-free, and the principal keeps growing." Then I said the words I knew would close it. "It's what your father would have wanted. He built that inheritance carefully. He would want it protected, Andrew went quiet. The mention of his father always settled him. If it saves money, he said finally, then yes, let's do it. Michelle smiled. Smart move, honey. But her eyes were not smiling, and I saw it. Just for a moment, the flicker of panic underneath the performance. Her perfect plan was beginning to unravel, and she didn't even know it yet. They married 2 weeks before his birthday. It was a lovely ceremony. I sat in the front row and I prayed for Andrew's happiness and for the truth to surface in its own time. On his 25th birthday, the trust was activated. Andrew received his $10,000 check. He was delighted. He bought himself a watch he had been admiring for years. He felt like a man who had arrived. Michelle smiled through all of it. She was patient. She was playing a long game. But 6 months is not very long at all. The arguments began quietly, a sharpness in her voice when money came up, a frustration she couldn't quite conceal. Then they grew louder. Andrew called me one evening, his voice confused and tired. Grandma, Michelle keeps asking about accessing the trust principle. I keep telling her it doesn't work that way, but she won't let it go. I listened. I said very little. I told him to call Mr. Morgan if she had questions about the trust structure. She did not call Mr. Morgan. She called a divorce attorney. 2 weeks later, she filed. Her attorney argued passionately for her share of the trust. Mr. Morgan was not moved. The trust is irrevocable, he explained to the court, with the quiet confidence of a man who had drafted every word of it himself. It belongs to Andrew's lineage. It existed before the marriage and will exist long after it. Mrs., soon to be formerly Mrs., is entitled to the standard division of marital assets, which, given that they were married for 6 months and acquired very little together, amounts to effectively nothing. She walked away with nothing but a lesson she had not expected to learn. Andrew was heartbroken. I will not pretend otherwise. He had loved her genuinely, completely, and that kind of love, when it ends, takes something with it that does not come back quickly. He came to see me on a quiet evening, a few weeks after it was all over. He sat across from me, looking tired but lighter, the way people do when they have been carrying something heavy and have finally been allowed to set it down. Grandma, he said, I don't understand what happened. She just changed after the money went into the trust, like a different person. I poured him tea. I looked at him, this boy I had raised, this man he had become. Sometimes, I said softly, money acts like a mirror. It shows people who they truly are. You didn't lose a wife, my dear. You lost a parasite, and you kept your legacy. He never found out what I overheard on that porch. He never knew how close he came to losing everything. And I have made my peace with that. Some truths are too heavy for a young heart to carry. It was never my job to break him with the truth. My job was to protect his future from the lie. I am 75 years old. I have lived long enough to know that love, real love, is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply shows up in the quiet decisions and the things you carry alone so someone else doesn't have to. Andrew will find real love one day. I am certain of it. And when he does, his future will be waiting for him, intact, protected, ready. Because a grandmother who loves you does not always tell you everything she knows. Sometimes she just makes sure you are safe. Love is blind, but wisdom sees clearly. As grandparents, as parents, as guardians, our role isn't just to love our children. It's to protect them, even from themselves, even when the threat wears a pretty face and speaks sweet words. I didn't expose Michelle. I didn't create a scene. I just closed the door on her greed and opened a window for Andrew's future. If you are facing a similar situation, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Seek counsel, make a plan. And remember, it's better to be the villain in someone else's story than to watch your loved one become a victim in their own. This is Elder Story Corner, where we protect what matters most. If this story resonated with you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs a little wisdom today. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your heart guarded.